His new office, if it could be called that, was a converted library next to the very church Ruby used to volunteer at on Sundays. He founded the Ruby Foundation not as a charity, but as a ripple, a word she had chosen. Its mission was simple: to locate, uplift, and empower children in the foster system before the world forgot them. Not through abstract policies or fleeting grants, but through steady, personal intervention. A laptop in one hand, a mentor in the other, a place to sleep that wasn't temporary. Jeremiah made sure every program, every building, every classroom they funded bore no trace of his name. Only hers. 3 years later, during the opening of a new youth wellness center in Watts, he stood beside a mural that spanned 2 walls. It had been painted by a group of teens from the neighborhood. In the center was a portrait of Ruby. Soft eyes, a gentle smile, and behind her, a swirl of children's drawings like a halo. One child stepped forward during the ceremony, a small girl with tight curls and wide eyes, and handed him a crayon sketch. A woman and a child, stick figures again. He crouched to accept it, smiling, and asked softly, "Who's this?" The girl shrugged. "She's just someone who helps." He folded the paper carefully. Later that night, he added it to the box. Yes, he still had it. He kept Ruby's box with him, now locked inside a simple wooden cabinet in the office. Not a shrine, a memory, a reminder. On quiet days, he opened it and read the letter again. "I knew you when the world didn't." And with every drawing he received, with every child who smiled back at him instead of flinching, he knew she was still with him, still watching, still helping. A ripple in time that had become a wave. He walked the neighborhood often, always alone. No assistance, no press, just his quiet footsteps down sidewalks Ruby once walked. People came to recognize him, not as the tech mogul, but as the man who carried a nurse's legacy in his chest. He never remarried. He didn't need to fill a silence. He had found what mattered. Once, when asked by a young man at a foundation event what kept him going, Jeremiah replied, "Someone stayed for me when they didn't have to. Now I stay for others." And that was all. The story of Jeremiah Cole, the billionaire who disappeared from tech to save the forgotten, was told in blogs, books, and documentaries. But the real story was never on screens. It lived in classrooms that didn't close, in homes that didn't evict, in letters from children to a woman they'd never met. Ruby Johnson had once feared she would leave the world unnoticed, but she hadn't. She had saved a boy. He saved the rest, and the drawing remained, always framed, always preserved, not just in attic corners or office walls, but in the heart of a man who had once been called Maya, and in the hands of every child who learned to draw hope again. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more like it. Check out the next video or explore others on the channel. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it. They mistook her for a servant and tried to kick her out. An hour later, she took the stage and silenced the entire country. Subscribe. In the comments, what city are you from? The wind was brisk that evening, sweeping through the San Francisco hills with a chill sharper than usual for early spring. Street lights shimmered like liquid gold on the wet pavement as cars glided by, silent and distant, heading toward their destinations, unaware of the moment that was about to unfold. At the base of a private hilltop estate, nestled behind a manicured line of cypress trees, stood the opulent facade of the Eglinton Club, its frosted glass doors and limestone columns exuding quiet arrogance. The kind of building designed to whisper its exclusivity, not shout it. Scarlett James stepped out of her modest electric car and quietly closed the door behind her. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked toward the entrance without hesitation. No chauffeur, no entourage, no designer gown with plunging neckline or statement earrings to announce her presence. She wore a fitted black dress that barely reached her knees, long sleeves hugging her arms with quiet elegance. Her natural curls were pulled back in a low bun, her face bare, save for a subtle touch of lip balm. There was something powerful in her restraint, though it was the kind of power most people in places like this were trained not to see. The glass doors of the club reflected her image back at her. As she approached, she noticed the two security guards flanking the entrance, dressed in sharp black suits with earpieces. One of them stepped forward, intercepting her with a practiced, professional smile. "Good evening," he said. "May I see your invitation?" Scarlett reached into her clutch and handed over her phone, the digital invitation glowing faintly on the screen. It bore the logo of the Horizon Women's Impact Fund and her name, Scarlett James, special guest and keynote participant. The guard glanced at it, frowned slightly, and then looked back up at her with a confused expression. "Do you happen to have a printed copy?" "No," Scarlett replied calmly. "This is the official RSVP link sent by your event team." "Right," he said, still holding the phone, now joined by his colleague who peered over his shoulder. The second man's brows drew together ever so slightly. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice level. "No problem," the first guard said quickly. "Just, we've had a lot of guests arrive, and sometimes names get missed on the list. If you could wait off to the side, we'll check with the front desk." He gestured to the right, toward a small marble bench beneath a giant potted orchid. It was subtle, almost polite, but the implication landed with all the weight of a slap. Scarlett held her gaze on him for a moment longer, then nodded once and stepped aside. The club's grand doors continued to open and close behind her as other guests arrived. White men in tailored tuxedos, white women glittering in jewel-toned gowns, air-kissing and laughing, each greeted with champagne and eager smiles. None of them were asked for a printed invitation. A woman in a shimmering green dress passed by, throwing Scarlett a glance laced with curiosity, then dismissal. It wasn't personal, it was reflex. She simply didn't fit. Scarlett sat on the bench, legs crossed, hands folded neatly over her lap. She didn't fidget or check her phone. She waited. The glass doors opened again, and this time out stepped a tall, lean woman with platinum blonde hair twisted into a perfect chignon. She was dressed in a deep navy gown with shoulder pads that gave her silhouette the air of command. In one hand, she held a tablet, in the other, a clipboard. She walked toward Scarlett with a briskness that suggested she had no time to waste. "I'm Stephanie Chase," she said, "event coordinator. You're—" "Scarlett James," Scarlett answered. Stephanie's eyes flicked down to her clipboard, then back up. "You're not listed under vendors or volunteers." "I'm not either," Scarlett said calmly. "I'm here as an invited guest. I'm also one of the keynote participants. I'll be presenting during the third block of the evening." Stephanie blinked, her lips pursing slightly. "Ah," she said, drawing out the syllable. "You're Scarlett James, the one from the grant program." Scarlett offered a patient smile. "Yes, the founder of the Second Voice Initiative." "Of course," Stephanie replied, tone modulating into something performative. "You'll have to forgive us. So many guests and some names get passed between departments. I'll just need to confirm with the hosting committee. In the meantime, would you mind waiting in our service lounge? It's just through the side entrance." Scarlett tilted her head. "The service lounge. It's quieter," Stephanie added, smiling. "You'll be more comfortable there." Scarlett's smile did not waver. "Thank you," she said, rising from the bench. "I'd prefer to wait here." Stephanie hesitated, then offered a brittle laugh. "As you wish." With a brisk nod, she turned and walked back inside, stilettos clicking on the marble. Scarlett remained where she stood. The chill in the air brushed against her arms, but she barely noticed. She was used to waiting, and she had never confused waiting with being passive. Through the glass, she watched the ballroom bloom into life. Chandeliers glittered above a sea of people, and music rose in the background. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of caviar and champagne. At one point, someone bumped into the glass near where Scarlett stood. It was a woman in a gold dress, laughing at something a man had said. Their faces were flushed with comfort, with the easy confidence of people who'd always had doors opened for them. Scarlett turned her head slightly, catching her reflection again. Calm, composed, but something smoldered behind her eyes. A memory rose, unbidden. She was 10 years old, sitting in a school hallway outside her classroom, clutching a page torn from her notebook. On it were 3 paragraphs she had written, her first essay for the school competition. Her teacher had read it, frowned, and said, "Scarlett, I think you should write something simpler, something more relatable for someone like you." Then, smiling gently, she'd added, "Ambition is good, but realism is better." That was the first time Scarlett learned what people meant when they said, "someone like you." Now, years later, those words echoed behind glass doors and forced smiles. But Scarlett had outgrown realism. She had lived through it, rewritten it, and turned it into a weapon. The same security guard who had first stopped her approached once more. "We've confirmed your name, Miss James. Sorry for the mix-up. Please, come in." He held the door open. Scarlett nodded and stepped inside. The warmth of the club's interior wrapped around her like velvet, the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfume thick in the air. The floor beneath her heels gleamed. She walked forward, moving past tables covered in crystal glasses, past conversations that dipped into silence as she passed, past eyes that followed her out of curiosity and calculation. Stephanie appeared again, this time with a wide, composed smile. "Everything's in order now. You're welcome to enjoy the cocktail hour before your segment. The reception hall is through those doors." Scarlett didn't answer immediately. Her gaze moved across the room, taking in every detail: the guests, the banners, the portraits on the wall of past donors and legacy figures. All white, all polished. "I'll stay here for now," she said simply. Stephanie blinked. "Here?" "Yes, I'm comfortable." And then Scarlett smiled, not wide or bright, but with the weight of a woman who had waited on too many thresholds and knew better than to rush through a door just because someone had finally opened it. She turned slightly, glancing once more toward the far end of the hall, where behind a velvet curtain stood the stage. Her stage. And she was not here to be grateful for it. She was here to own it. Scarlett remained near the back wall of the reception hall, her posture relaxed yet immovable, like a statue carved from calm defiance. The room had grown louder in her absence, filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and the echoing laughter of polished voices. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays balanced effortlessly in hand, their black uniforms blending into the background, their smiles as rehearsed as the event's agenda. Every detail was deliberate, from the candlelight flickering atop the mirrored tables to the instrumental renditions of soul classics being played by a live quartet that no one seemed to truly hear. She scanned the room with quiet precision. There were politicians, polished men in tailored tuxedos who gestured as they talked, using their wives' names like trophies in conversation. CEOs from philanthropic branches of major corporations. Celebrities with million-dollar smiles. The Brandon was seamless. Behind them, the walls were lined with tall pull-up banners bearing the event's slogan, "Empowering Tomorrow's Women Today." Scarlett's own face was printed on one of them, smiling wide, mid-laugh, head tilted to the side, a photo taken during a volunteer day she'd hosted at her community center. She hadn't known then it would become promotional material. Someone nearby pointed at the banner and whispered to her friend, "That's her, right? The woman from the prison program?" Scarlett heard it. She heard everything. Years of being underestimated had taught her to listen not just to words, but to the air between them. She took a glass of still water from a tray and sipped it slowly. Across the room, a woman in a crimson dress took the stage with a flourish of gratitude. The lights dimmed slightly as the microphone caught her voice and elevated it above the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor to welcome you to the Horizon Fund's annual gala. Tonight, we celebrate the stories that inspire us, the women who overcome, and the generous hearts who make their transformation possible." A wave of polite applause swept the room. Scarlett's hands remained at her sides. "Later this evening, you'll meet one of our most remarkable participants. Someone whose journey from hardship to hope exemplifies the power of our collective commitment to change." The woman gestured toward the crowd with an open palm. "Scarlett James, wherever you are, we're honored to share your story tonight." Scarlett inclined her head slightly, but did not step forward. She was not required to. She had no desire to. As the crowd murmured in vague appreciation, the woman continued her speech, layering buzzwords like bricks in a pre-approved wall. Resilience, empowerment, upliftment, partnership. Scarlett had heard them all before, worn thin from repetition, hollowed by the very people who wielded them. Each word floated through the air like perfume, pleasant but unsubstantial. She turned toward a high table where two men in black tuxedos were engaged in a quiet but animated conversation. One of them held a half-empty glass of whiskey, swirling it as he spoke. "It's brilliant," he said. "Package the narrative just right. Rags to riches, trauma to triumph, the American redemption arc. People eat that up." The second man laughed. "You can't buy that kind of PR. And with a black woman at the center, it's bulletproof. Grants, press, you name it." Scarlett's fingers tightened around her glass for a moment before she set it down on a marble ledge behind her. She didn't interrupt. She never needed to. Silence, she'd learned, often revealed more than confrontation. She moved through the crowd like a ghost no one dared recognize. Guests glanced at her and then quickly looked away, their minds unsure of where to place her. She didn't fit the template. Not glittering enough to be a socialite, not meek enough to be a beneficiary. Stephanie returned, eyes scanning until they landed on Scarlett. "There you are," she said with a relieved smile, clasping her hands together. "The committee wants to make sure you're ready for the third segment. Just a quick thank you, maybe share a personal anecdote, and then hand off the certificate to our Youth Rising winner." "Of course," Scarlett replied evenly. Stephanie hesitated, tilting her head in a gentle nudge. "Just remember to keep it light. No need to get too intense. A touch of hope, maybe a joke, something uplifting. This is a celebration, after all." Scarlett studied her. Stephanie's smile trembled just enough to betray a flicker of uncertainty, as if she knew her words teetered on the edge of something delicate. Scarlett nodded once. Understood. Stephanie's smile widened in relief before she melted back into the sea of evening gowns and designer cologne. Scarlett exhaled slowly. Light, hopeful, palatable. She remembered a similar moment years ago when a documentary crew had approached her shelter program offering to film a segment for a nationally syndicated talk show. They had arrived with lighting kits and makeup artists, asking the women to look a bit more vulnerable. When one of the residents, a quiet mother named Bree, asked if they could share her real story, the producer had replied, "We need a specific arc. Recovery, not rage. Triumph, not trauma." Scarlett had sent them away. Now she was back in a room filled with smiling faces that demanded the same thing. Not truth, but the digestible version of it. A tray of hors d'oeuvres passed by, but she waved it off. Her stomach wasn't ready for anything curated. She turned a corner and entered a side corridor lined with soft lights and framed black and white photos of previous award recipients. There were no faces like hers. The names beneath the photos spoke of generational wealth, inherited power, curated legacy. She stood there for a moment, absorbing it. A sudden voice beside her broke the silence. "You don't look impressed." Scarlett turned. A woman stood beside her, around her age, with short silver-streaked hair and a knowing smile. Her name tag read Lucia Monroe, board member. "I don't impress easily," Scarlett said. Lucia's eyes twinkled. "Neither do I, but I'm curious. What do you think of the event so far?" Scarlett paused. "It's beautiful, controlled, polished." Lucia chuckled. "Diplomatic answer. You've been watching everything. Not many people do that anymore." Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "Most people look to be seen. I look to understand." Lucia studied her for a beat longer than most would be comfortable with, then gave a short nod. "I look forward to your speech." "I haven't given it yet." "You already have," Lucia said, and then walked away. Scarlett stood there, her thoughts folding over themselves like pages of a book no one wanted to read past the first chapter. They wanted a story, but only the one that fit inside their polished frames. A cover photo, a quote on a poster, something to clap for between the wine pours. She turned back toward the reception hall and caught her own face on another banner. The caption beneath it read, "When women rise, we all rise." She wondered how many people here had actually risen, and how many were just floating on the backs of others who never got invited through the door. As the crowd was called toward the main ballroom for the next segment, Scarlett walked behind them, her heels tapping softly against the marble. The hum of anticipation buzzed through the air as the lights shifted and the music swelled. Somewhere behind the velvet curtains, a stage waited, and beyond it, an audience ready for their serving of sanitized inspiration. Scarlett kept walking. She wasn't going to be their story. She was going to be their reckoning. The velvet curtains were heavier than they looked, thick with dustless perfection and silent history. Behind them, Scarlett stood still, her hands loosely clasped in front of her, her breath even, her mind calculating. The stage manager had shown her the teleprompter, asked if she wanted to rehearse her steps, reminded her twice where to stand. She had nodded politely, but offered nothing more. The hum of the crowd just beyond the curtain had grown steadier, denser, as people returned to their seats with glasses in hand and the hollow chatter of indulgent conversation. Soft music faded as the MC's voice rose again, warming up the room with a few casual jokes before inviting everyone to give their attention to the next segment. Scarlett remained in place, half in shadow. Her dress, still simple and unembellished, absorbed the surrounding darkness. She stood with the gravity of someone waiting not for applause but for a verdict. She had not yet spoken a word on that stage, but her presence had already unsettled more than a few. She felt the pulse of that discomfort, subtle and evasive, like a draft in a sealed room. Behind her, a voice cleared its throat. She turned slightly to find a young assistant, headset around his neck holding a clipboard. He smiled too brightly. "Everything good, Miss James? Just letting you know you're up in about 15 minutes. They'll cue the video intro, and then you're on. Quick thanks, hand the certificate to the Youth Rising winner, then the next speaker takes over. Easy flow." Scarlett nodded once. "Thank you." The assistant lingered a moment, then hesitated. "They asked if you could keep it under 3 minutes. It's a timing thing. The sponsor reel is slotted right after." She raised an eyebrow. 3 minutes. He chuckled nervously. "I know, right? But they just want to keep it tight." She didn't reply, and after a beat of awkward silence, he backed away, murmuring into his headset. Scarlett turned back toward the curtain. Her fingers brushed the edge of the podium just off stage. She imagined standing behind it, speaking into the room full of curated generosity and manufactured inspiration, knowing every second would be measured, edited, clipped, and possibly repurposed to serve a version of her that was easier to digest. A group of women emerged from the adjacent hallway laughing in high-pitched bursts. One of them wore a gown that shimmered like liquid metal, her blonde hair twisted into a crown of perfection. She was followed by 2 others who walked with the elegance of practiced entitlement. As they passed, one of them glanced at Scarlett, her eyes pausing, expression unreadable. "That's her," the woman whispered, not quietly enough. The blonde woman looked Scarlett up and down, smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Oh, I thought she'd be taller." They moved on, still chuckling. Scarlett did not react. She had long since learned that some insults were crafted more from ignorance than cruelty, yet both carried the same sting, and she refused to give either the dignity of acknowledgement. But as their heels clicked away, her breath deepened, her spine straightened. She was no stranger to being underestimated. What they didn't understand was that underestimation was her most reliable disguise. Another name was being called on stage. A woman in a silver dress took the podium, launched into a passionate speech about mentorship and legacy. Scarlett listened closely. The words were perfect, sculpted, safe. There was nothing wrong with them, and that was the problem. She stepped away from the edge of the curtain, walking toward a small alcove where bottles of water and makeup kits sat beneath a mirror framed in light. She studied herself. Her reflection stared back with stillness. No artifice, no illusion, only the steady gaze of a woman who had built her life on silence and now stood on the cusp of something else. A stylist approached, holding a small brush. "Would you like a quick touch-up?" "I'm fine," Scarlett said without looking away. "Just a little powder." "I said I'm fine." The stylist nodded, stepped back, and disappeared into the folds of backstage movement. Scarlett returned to the mirror. For a moment, her mind drifted, drawn by the current of memory. She was 19 again, in the back seat of her car, parked in the farthest corner of a supermarket lot. It was winter, and her breath had clouded the windshield. In her lap was a battered spiral notebook filled with scribbles and diagrams. She had written the name for the first time that night, the Second Voice Initiative. She had underlined it 3 times, each stroke harder than the last. That night, she had eaten a stale granola bar, curled into her coat, and whispered into the darkness, "I will build something no one can take from me." Now, they were asking her to reduce that journey to 3 minutes, a certificate handoff, and a polite bow. But she hadn't climbed this far to perform. Behind her, a quiet knock echoed. She turned to find a man in a crisp charcoal suit holding a tablet. His name tag read David Harmon, Program Director. He was smiling, but there was an edge behind it. Miss James, we're honored to have you with us tonight. I wanted to personally thank you for being a part of our program. Scarlett inclined her head. Thank you. David stepped closer. Just a quick heads up. There's been a bit of feedback about your segment. Nothing serious, just that you're an important face for this initiative, and we want to make sure the messaging is consistent. Consistent with what? Scarlett asked. He hesitated. With the tone of the evening. Hopeful, uplifting. You've done incredible work and people are really inspired by it, so it would be great if you could emphasize the transformational aspects. Less about the struggle, more about what you've overcome. Scarlett's mouth twitched. You want victory without the war? David chuckled, unsure if she was joking. We just want to keep the energy high. People respond best to positive messaging. I see, she said. He offered a tight nod, then gestured toward the hallway. The spotlight will be yours in a few minutes. Let us know if you need anything. I will. As he walked away, Scarlett exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady, but something deep within her had begun to burn. It wasn't rage. She had buried rage long ago. This was something colder, sharper, more deliberate. They wanted her face, not her voice. Her story, but not her truth. Her image, but not her presence. A soft chime signaled the end of the previous segment. The MC's voice returned, warming the crowd once again. And now, we are privileged to welcome a woman whose journey exemplifies courage, resilience, and the spirit of transformation. Please welcome to the stage Scarlett James. The applause swelled. Scarlett did not move. Not yet. She looked once more into the mirror, then turned toward the curtain. She stepped forward, not to be seen, but to be heard. Not to please, but to remind. Not to deliver a moment of inspiration, but to reclaim something that had been stolen from women like her for far too long. The right to speak in full voice, without edits, without apologies. And as she approached the light, one thought surged above all others. Let them see who I am. Let them choke on it. The stage was awash in warm light, the soft golden hue crafted by lighting technicians who had calibrated every bulb and angle to evoke elegance without arrogance. The air buzzed with rehearsed reverence, applause carefully measured as Scarlett James stepped onto the platform. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, not too fast, not too slow. The applause, polite but unsure, began to fade as she took her place behind the podium. For a breathless moment, she stood completely still. Before her lay a sea of curated faces, men and women in evening wear, champagne glasses still half raised, some already setting down their utensils from the dessert course. Candles flickered on every round table, reflecting in crystal and silver. Behind her, a screen had begun to flicker to life, playing a slow montage of images. Scarlett, working with children in a community classroom, standing at the ribbon cutting of a new shelter wing, hugging tearful women with tremulous smiles. The music underneath was soft piano, full of crescendo and sentimentality, each note designed to gently nudge at heartstrings. She recognized every image. She remembered the faces, but she had not chosen these pictures. The final photo, looming tall and luminous behind her, was the one that stopped her cold. It was from the community cleanup event 2 years ago. She had been laughing, genuinely, she recalled, bare-faced, hair tied back, wearing jeans and a Second Voice t-shirt, arms wrapped around a girl who had just been released from juvenile detention. That laugh had not been performed. It had not been offered to impress or persuade, and now it hovered above her like a watermark, a curated proof of transformation. Beneath the image, a slogan stretched in bold white text, "Our victory over poverty." Scarlett's fingers brushed the edge of the podium. She looked out at the crowd, made eye contact with no one, and took a breath that stretched into silence. The room shifted in its seat. A few heads tilted. A polite cough cut through the hush. The MC, seated at the far end of the stage, adjusted her mic slightly, her smile faltering just for a second. Then Scarlett spoke. "I wasn't born to inspire you." The words landed with the gravity of a stone tossed into a glass pool. Stillness followed, and then the faintest ripple of discomfort. In the back rows, someone shifted in their chair. "I wasn't created to fit into a marketing strategy, or to be a bullet point on a brochure. I didn't claw my way through systemic failure, through hunger and homelessness, through the kind of darkness that makes you forget your own name, just to become a token of redemption. That's not why I'm here." She let the silence stretch again, wider this time, deeper. "I am not a symbol of your success. I am the evidence of your failure." The words struck hard, and this time the reaction was visible. Brows furrowed, eyes darted across tables. The MC froze mid-nod. Scarlett held her ground, her voice steady, each syllable clear, her calmness deliberate and absolute. "You call this a celebration of empowerment. You use words like resilience and triumph as if they are decorations. But resilience isn't something to be praised. It is a response to pain. And I didn't choose it. It was forced on me by the same systems many of you represent, endorse, or politely ignore." There was movement at the side of the room now, someone murmuring into a headset, a woman raising her hand as if signaling for a delayed cue. But the tech booth stayed still. No music swelled, no microphone cut off. Scarlett's voice continued to carry. "Do you know what it's like to wake up in the back seat of your own car for the third month in a row? To wash your face in a gas station sink? To pretend you're okay in job interviews knowing you have nowhere to return to when the sun goes down? I do. And that part of my story never made it onto your banners." She turned briefly toward the screen, now frozen on her smiling face. "That woman up there exists because I built her. I built her alone, brick by brick, in the dead of night, with no resources and no applause. I am not your miracle. I am not your headline, and I am not your success story." The room was frozen. A woman near the front had stopped blinking altogether. A man in the second row stared into his glass, swirling the remains of his champagne. The ambient music, long since faded, had not resumed. There was only her voice now. "There is power in this room, wealth, influence, and yet, for all your resources, you didn't ask me what I needed. You asked me to show up looking grateful." A shift in the room again, an intake of breath, the uncomfortable noise of someone trying not to fidget. But no one left. "I see your eyes now. You're thinking, why is she doing this? You want to know if this is anger, or rebellion, or a lack of appreciation. It's not." She stepped out from behind the podium, her voice softening, not losing strength, but transforming it. "This is truth, unfiltered, unrehearsed, uncomfortable." Scarlett walked slowly toward the front of the stage, heels clicking softly, her silhouette cutting through the haze of spotlight. "The problem isn't that I'm speaking this way. The problem is that you thought I wouldn't." She let that settle before turning slightly. her eyes catching the edge of the front row where a teenage girl sat in a borrowed dress, fingers twisting the hem in her lap. Scarlett recognized her immediately, one of the youth program participants. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something brighter, something real. Scarlett turned back toward the crowd. "This isn't the speech I was supposed to give. I had another one written. It was full of gratitude and inspiration. You would have loved it." A ripple of nervous laughter flickered at the edges of the room, quickly smothered. "But I couldn't give that speech, because I looked at that girl in the front row and I remembered why I'm really here. Not for you, not for applause, for her. And for every woman who still sleeps with her shoes on because she doesn't know when she'll have to run." She returned to the podium and placed both hands firmly on its edge. "You asked me to say a few words and hand over a certificate, as if my work fits neatly into 3 minutes and a ribbon. But transformation doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in shelters and halfway houses and prison cells. It happens when no one is looking. And tonight, someone needed to look." She stepped back. "I will not be your cover story, but I will be your mirror." With that, she walked off stage. The silence was total, thick and unresolved, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the screen remained frozen. Her face still smiled out across the audience, though now it meant something else entirely. She passed the MC, who looked like she had forgotten how to move. She passed the assistant in the headset, who had dropped his clipboard. She passed the banner at the edge of the hallway, her face, her name, her borrowed narrative, and didn't even glance at it. Outside the ballroom, in the quiet of the corridor, Scarlett paused. The hum of the event was distant now, muffled by walls and layers of etiquette. She could still feel the lights behind her, but they no longer touched her. In the corner of the hallway stood Lucia Monroe, arms crossed, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "Remind me never to follow your act," she said softly. Scarlett gave her a small nod. "I wasn't performing." "I know," Lucia replied. "That's why it worked." And somewhere in the depths of the grand reception hall, a room full of well-dressed power brokers sat in uncomfortable silence, facing not a story, but a reckoning. The hallway was cool and quiet, but Scarlett could still feel the heat of the stage radiating from her skin. It wasn't the stage lights or the thick air of a crowded ballroom. It was the residual charge of speaking truths that had long clawed at the inside of her throat, now finally loosed in the world. She didn't walk quickly, but she didn't linger either. Her heels tapped evenly on the polished floor, echoing in rhythm with her pulse, steady and resolved. Behind her, the doors to the ballroom remained closed, as if the entire room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. The applause never came. She hadn't left them speechless in admiration. She had left them speechless in shame. Lucia Monroe caught up to her near the arch that led to the side vestibule, her heels quieter, her expression unreadable. Scarlett didn't stop. "They're stunned," Lucia said after a beat. "Good." Scarlett gave her a sidelong glance. "Was that what you were hoping for when you invited me?" Lucia tilted her head slightly. "I hoped you'd tell the truth. You did. I didn't do it for them." "I know," Lucia said. "That's why it mattered." The corridor bent to the left, opening toward the side entrance that led back to the coat room, and then the private car waiting in the circular drive. Scarlett had no interest in staying for the donor reception or the endless, tense small talk that would inevitably follow. Let them sip their champagne in silence or scramble to explain away what they'd just witnessed. Her part was done. Except it wasn't. Not quite. The moment she stepped into the coat room, she saw the white envelope on the counter. Her name printed in bold type, the handwriting unfamiliar but deliberate. She picked it up, already knowing. The weight of it. The silence of it. She slid a finger under the flap and drew out the contents. A check. A donation receipt. An official letter from the Horizon Fund's board thanking her for her partnership and enclosing a donation for $1 million to the Second Voice Initiative, to be announced on stage during the final gala segment. She stared at the check for a long moment. Her name, their signature, their claim. Then, with surgical calm, she folded it in half, then again, until the paper creased in her palm like fabric. She opened her clutch, dropped it inside, and walked out into the night. The valet blinked when he saw her, his surprise nearly hidden, but not quite. "Car's ready, Miss James," he said. "Will you be returning later?" Scarlett didn't answer. She stepped into the vehicle, let the door close behind her, and inhaled once, deeply. The car slid forward, lights from the club's facade slipping across the windows like water. She didn't look back. The city opened before her, familiar and unconcerned, its streets soaked in rain that had begun to fall while she'd been on stage. Drops ran in rivulets down the windshield, lit by traffic signals and storefronts. She watched them, her mind not drifting, but sharpening. She had done what they never expected. She had said what they always feared, and she had said it to their faces, with their microphones, under their chandeliers, within the very walls they built to insulate themselves from voices like hers. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the breach. Back at the event, chaos simmered just beneath the surface. Inside the ballroom, forks clinked awkwardly against plates as people tried to resume their carefully choreographed routines. The MC had not returned to the stage. The next speaker had refused to follow Scarlett. The staff scrambled to adjust the schedule. Conversations picked up with forced ease. Phrases like bold, unexpected, and unfiltered flitting from table to table like a virus no one wanted to claim as theirs. Stephanie Chase, the event coordinator, stood near the back of the room, expression locked in damage control. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. Texts from board members, press liaisons, PR directors. She barely registered the donors murmuring about Scarlett's speech, or the uncomfortable glances cast toward the banners still standing around the perimeter of the room. No one dared remove them yet. They bore Scarlett's face, and removing them now would only confirm the unease everyone was trying to ignore. In a corner, David Harmon paced with a glass of red wine he had yet to sip, speaking into his earpiece with clipped precision. He alternated between outrage and appeasement, trying to assure both the executive board and the foundation's largest sponsor that things were still under control. "She went rogue," he said. "No, we didn't approve the speech. Yes, we'll be issuing a statement." Outside, the city buzzed on. Scarlett's car wound through the quiet neighborhoods, past parks and storefronts that were part of her world, not theirs. She wasn't headed home yet. Not to the apartment she kept, nor to the office she barely had time to visit. Instead, she gave the driver an address in South Mission, a youth shelter she had helped fund and build years ago, back when the Second Voice Initiative was just a blueprint and a prayer. The building wasn't large, but it was clean, bright, and solid. The security light at the front flickered a little, but it worked. Inside, a young woman sat behind a desk, blinking when Scarlett entered. "Miss James," the girl said, eyes wide, we saw your speech." Scarlett smiled, just a little. "I figured it might make the rounds. You really said it. All of it. I didn't say enough." The girl stood slowly, unsure of what to do. People are freaking out. They'll live, Scarlett said. They'll adjust, and some of them won't. That's the point. She walked into the common room where a few girls sat huddled around a phone, replaying the clip that was already circulating on social media. The caption beneath it read, "Activist hijacks gala speech with scathing truth." Scarlett didn't correct it. She didn't need to. The girls noticed her and froze. Then one of them, a girl named Nia, slowly stood up. "You didn't let them turn you into a mascot," Nia said quietly. "You burned the costume on stage." Scarlett nodded once. "We don't owe them our silence. We never did." A silence passed between them, full and raw. And then, like air returning to lungs, one of the girls clapped. Another followed. And another. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't polite. It was real. Scarlett sat down with them, shoes off, feet curled beneath her. She answered their questions, listened to their reactions, took their anger seriously. She stayed for an hour, then 2. No cameras, no statements, just presence. When she left, dawn was beginning to peel over the city skyline. Her car waited quietly. Inside, she opened her clutch and pulled out the folded check. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with her palm. Then she tore it in half, and then in half again, and again, until it was nothing but scattered paper in her lap. She let it fall to the floor of the car and closed her eyes. Behind her, the night's glamour dissolved into memory. Ahead of her, the day waited, and she was ready for it. By the time the sun climbed fully above the skyline, the remnants of the night before had already begun to rot beneath the weight of public reaction. What had started as a few shaky videos shared by early attendees quickly morphed into a digital storm, spreading from private messages to open platforms, from niche activist circles to mainstream outlets. Within hours, Scarlett James was trending across social media. But it wasn't the kind of trend born of scandal or spectacle. It was something deeper. People weren't laughing. They were listening. Her name appeared in headlines, both reverent and restrained. "Nonprofit honoree rejects gala spotlight with unscripted speech," read one. Another, less generous, called it a breach of philanthropic decorum. But the truth didn't need a headline to survive. It had already rooted itself in the minds of those who'd watched her stand, steady and unflinching, and say what no one had dared to say in such rooms before. Scarlett didn't follow the coverage. She didn't need to. She had long since learned that truth didn't grow stronger in echo chambers. It grew in silence, in the deep, uncomfortable moments people carried with them after the applause died. It grew in confrontation and discomfort. That's where the work began. She sat at her desk in the modest office space she used in the community center. The room wasn't much: white walls, a window that stuck in the summer, a desk that rocked if leaned on too hard, but it was hers. The one concession to formality was the simple framed photo on the bookshelf. A group of women standing in front of a brick building with a spray-painted banner above them. The first shelter she'd helped open. None of them smiled for the camera. Their faces were sharp with pride, not performance. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The door creaked open, and her assistant, Devin, stepped in. He was young, whip-smart, and already looked exhausted by the morning's wave of attention. "There's a line of reporters out front," he said, rubbing his forehead, "and 3 more TV crews circling the block. I think they're waiting for you to—" "I'm not giving a statement," Scarlett said without looking up. Devin nodded. "I figured, but someone from Horizon called. They're asking if we still plan to cash the check. Scarlett glanced up. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was firm. There is no check. Devon hesitated. Do you want me to tell them that? She stood and walked to the window, watching the sidewalk. A pair of young women were arguing with a security guard, phones in hand, pointing toward the building. One of them wore a T-shirt with Scarlett's face printed across it. She turned away from the glass. Tell them the donation has been respectfully declined, she said, and that we don't accept funding from institutions that mistake silence for civility. Devon nodded again and left the room without another word. She trusted him to do exactly as she asked. The torn check remained in pieces on the floor of her car. She hadn't bothered to clean it up. Let it rest there like the ghost of a bribe she'd buried with her own hands. Later that afternoon, a package arrived. Couriered, not mailed. It was wrapped in crisp white paper with a silver ribbon and bore the unmistakable logo of the Horizon Fund. Inside was a thick binder labeled Strategic Partnership Proposal. Attached to it was a handwritten note from one of the senior board members, laced with flowery language and subtle reprimands. Though your words last night came as a surprise, the note began, we acknowledge your passion and commitment to your cause. We believe there is still an opportunity to work together in a framework that supports shared goals and mutual respect. Scarlett read it once, then again, slower. She placed the letter on her desk and opened the binder. Pages of PR strategy, funding structures, media training outlines, and bullet-pointed messaging protocols filled the glossy sheets. There were quotes from her speech embedded within suggested press materials, reframed, softened, decontextualized. They were already rewriting her. She closed the binder, stood up, and walked it to the shredder. The whirring sound filled the room as the pages were pulled in, chewed up, and spat out in crinkled ribbons. When she returned to her desk, she felt lighter. The next week passed in a blur of messages, interviews declined, speaking invitations ignored. A few former allies in the nonprofit world distanced themselves. Sponsors reevaluated their commitments. But in the corners that mattered, in shelters, in transitional homes, in late-night calls between women clawing their way out of survival, Scarlett's words had done something no sponsorship ever could. They had drawn a line in the sand. On the third morning, she received a call from a reporter she trusted, someone she had once worked with during a quiet campaign to prevent the closure of a domestic violence shelter in the Tenderloin. His name was Theo. He didn't push her. He never had. Just wanted to ask what comes next, he said gently. You said on stage you wouldn't be a cover story, so what will you be? Scarlett sat in silence for a moment, then replied, what I've always been, a builder. A builder of what? Places where women can speak without asking permission, she said, and where no one owns their voice. He thanked her and hung up without pressing for more. She appreciated that. The next day, she called her board together. A small group, 5 women, all of whom had been through the system in one form or another. None of them wore suits. Most had kids. All of them had stories that had never made it onto banners. They met in the back room of the shelter, sitting around a scratch table with coffee and donuts. Scarlett didn't bring an agenda. She brought a question. How do we make sure our work never gets used as decoration again? Silence met her, then slow nods, then ideas. Real ones. They talked for hours about shifting funding streams, building autonomy, setting public guidelines on how their organization could and couldn't be used in media narratives. They talked about building a media literacy program for survivors, about taking ownership of their own storytelling. They voted to start a small press, a digital platform that would publish essays and testimonies directly from the women in their programs. That night, Scarlett walked the long hallway of the shelter, stopping at each room, pausing outside doors to listen, not eavesdropping, just breathing in the reality of the place. Laughter, distant music, a baby crying, soft voices exchanging thoughts over warm plates. She didn't need applause. She needed this. As she returned to her car, a girl sat on the front steps, maybe 16. Skinny, sharp eyes, arms crossed like a fortress. She looked up as Scarlett approached. "You the lady from the video?" Scarlett stopped. "I am." The girl studied her for a moment. "You pissed a lot of people off." "I know." "Good." Scarlett smiled, just a little. "You staying here tonight?" The girl shrugged. "Maybe. Thinking about it." Scarlett sat beside her on the concrete. The air was cool and dry. "Take your time," she said. "The door will still be here tomorrow." They sat in silence for a while. Eventually, the girl leaned back against the wall, her eyes drifting toward the sky. Scarlett watched her, and in that moment, she saw it. The real return. Not money, not prestige, but the quiet flicker of someone allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be invisible anymore. She drove home past midnight, windows down, city lights like blinking eyes in the dark. At a red light, she looked down at the floor of the car. The last scrap of the check remained there, caught in the seam of the carpet. She picked it up, held it between her fingers, then let it go. The wind took it through the open window. Let them keep their checks. She had something better. She had her name. The city looked different at dawn. It wasn't the quiet or the pale blue light creeping between the buildings that made it unfamiliar. It was the absence of illusion. In the early hours, the city didn't pretend to be anything more than what it was. The glass towers that sparkled by day stood raw and colorless. The street lamps flickered their last, fighting against the rising sun. Trash trucks rumbled through empty avenues, and every corner felt honest. Honest in its fatigue. Honest in its imperfection. Scarlett sat at her desk with the window cracked open. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement and something faintly metallic. Her hands rested on the keyboard, but she hadn't typed in over an hour. The document open in front of her was blank, save for a title in bold, "The Women We Don't See." It wasn't a speech or a proposal. It was the beginning of something she hadn't yet named. And she was in no rush to define it. The digital clock on her desk blinked 6:21. The building was still asleep, but she wasn't alone. Somewhere down the hallway, someone was coughing softly. In the common room, she could hear a chair scraping back as one of the women settled in early with a mug of instant coffee. These were the sounds she trusted. Not the roar of applause, not the chirping of curated interviews. These small, human sounds were the proof of life that no article could ever convey. Her phone vibrated once. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Theo, the reporter who'd called her earlier in the week. "Thought you might want to see this." Attached was a link to a national opinion column. The headline read, "What Scarlett James Taught Us About the Power of Saying No." She didn't open it. She didn't need to. If they'd finally learned something, it wasn't because she had packaged it for them. It was because she had refused to. And if they hadn't learned, she would not waste breath persuading them. A soft knock came at the door. She looked up to see Devin, his hair damp from the shower still tugging on the sleeve of a hoodie. He didn't speak right away, just raised an envelope in one hand. This just came. Messenger said it's from the governor's office. She raised an eyebrow. I didn't know the governor knew my address. Devin smirked. Seems everyone does now. He handed over the envelope and left, letting the door click shut behind him. Scarlett placed the envelope on her desk without opening it. Let them wait. She stood and crossed the room, her muscles stiff from too many nights with too little rest. She glanced at the wall where a new chart had been pinned, outlines for the next phase of the Second Voice initiative. New programs, a legal fund, expansion into neighboring cities. Plans drawn from the fire that still simmered in her chest, a slow, deliberate burn that made her precise and unyielding. The knock that followed wasn't at her door. It came from the main entrance of the building, 3 short raps against the heavy wood. She heard the muffled sound of someone answering it, then voices in the hallway, and then she heard her name. A moment later, the door opened again. "Scarlett," Devin said, more cautious this time. "Someone's here to see you." She turned and found a young woman standing behind him. Not a girl, young, but not untouched. Her posture was defensive, shoulders tight, eyes searching. She wore a faded denim jacket and black boots scuffed from walking. Her hands were tucked into her pockets, not from the cold, but from something deeper. A need to protect. Scarlett studied her, then stepped forward. "I'm Maya," the girl said, voice barely above a whisper. Scarlett nodded. "Would you like to come in?" Maya hesitated, then stepped into the room. She didn't sit. "I saw the video," she said, "the one where you spoke." Scarlett said nothing, letting her continue. "I've been watching people talk about it online. They keep calling you brave, or crazy. Some say you ruined your career. Others say you made history." "And what do you say?" Scarlett asked. Maya looked down at the floor. "I say you told the truth, and that's the only thing I've been waiting for someone to do." The silence stretched between them, full of unspoken weight. Then Maya pulled a folded flyer from her pocket. It was crumpled, edges worn. Scarlett recognized it immediately. It was from the first campaign they had run when the initiative launched, back when they were still fighting for legitimacy. The image on it was one she hadn't seen in years. Not her face, but the back of a woman's head, walking down an alley. The words beneath it bold, "We don't save, we stand with." "I kept this," Maya said. "It was the first thing I saw that didn't make me feel like a victim." Scarlett took the flyer gently. Her fingers brushed the crease, but she didn't try to smooth it. "I need somewhere to go," Maya said, "but I also need to know that if I stay, I won't be turned into a story." "You won't," Scarlett said. "We don't do that here." Maya nodded once, her shoulders easing just slightly. She turned to go, but then paused. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Scarlett blinked. "Regret what?" "Walking off that stage, tearing up that check, saying what you said." Scarlett walked to the window. Outside, the sun had finally cleared the edge of the skyline. Its light struck the tops of the buildings and turned them gold, not with pretense, but with possibility. "I regret not saying it sooner," she said. Maya left the room and Scarlett sat back at her desk. She glanced at the untouched document still glowing on the screen. Then she closed it. There were other ways to speak. Later that afternoon, she gathered the staff in the main hall. They stood in a circle, some holding notebooks, others sipping coffee. No podiums, no microphones, just voices. They spoke about what came next, not in terms of press or metrics, but in terms of community. They spoke of what they wanted to build, a space not for redemption arcs or narratives, but for life. Messy, difficult, unfinished life. The kind that didn't fit into grant applications or gala speeches. When the meeting ended, they stayed, talking, planning, dreaming. No one rushed out. That night, Scarlett sat in the courtyard alone, a blanket over her lap, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hand. The stars above the city were faint, but they were there. She leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the quiet wrap around her like a second skin. She didn't need a stage anymore. She had a home, a mission, a voice. And somewhere in that quiet space between day and night, between pain and purpose, between rage and resurrection, she found peace. Not the kind offered by compromise, but the kind forged by fire. The kind that grows in the places no one expects to bloom. From where no victories are expected, she had built one. And she wasn't done. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Watch the other videos on the channel to discover more powerful stories. And if this one spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.